Hi there, this webinar is about executive functions. My name is Jessica Finucane. I'm a school psychologist with Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center. So here's the agenda. So we're going to move through what are executive functions, the brain and executive functions in the classroom, and the three-concept model of executive functions, which is also going to include some classroom examples and some strategies. So what are executive functions, or EF for short? A set of processes needed to manage oneself and one's resources to achieve a goal. It's basically an umbrella term for brain-based skills involving mental control and self-regulation. It also includes many other skills that we'll get into a little later on. And what's important to remember is that all students have unique profiles and strengths and weaknesses. They may excel with some skills while struggling with others. So for me, I think I'm really good with my working memory and my memory skills, but I may struggle with prioritizing. Okay, so executive functions can be categorized into three concepts. This is just one way to conceptualize EF, and so there are other ways. Within these three concepts are skills such as paying attention, organizing and planning, initiating and staying focused on tasks, managing emotions, and keeping track of what you're doing. But today we're going to focus on working memory, cognitive flexibility, and then impulse control. So we're going to talk a little bit about the brain and executive functions because I don't think we can talk about executive functions without talking about the brain. So our executive functionings they all take place in our prefrontal cortex, so the front part of our brain. So that's where our big decisions are made, our planning, our organizing, all of those executive functioning skills, they all happen in our prefrontal cortex. We can also think of executive functions as our command and control function. They can be viewed as our conductor of all cognitive skills. So this is just a little metaphor about the conductor. Okay, so it's important to remember that our brains are always, they grow and they mature and they develop connections well into adulthood. I think the prefrontal cortex actually isn't done being developed until the mid-20s. So a person's executive functioning skills are shaped by physical changes in the brain, life experiences that happen in the classroom and in everyday life. So remember that executive skill development is gradual and developmental. It's not automatic. It just doesn't come naturally all the time, or ever, sorry. So early attention to developing efficient skills in this area can be very helpful. And as a rule, direct instruction, frequent reassurance, and explicit feedback are strongly recommended. So it's important to remember that students with things like specific learning disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, autism spectrum disorder, anxiety, and/or trauma affected, along with other disorders, nearly always have difficulty with one or more executive skills, which can lead to obstacles in learning and their behavior. However, it's important to remember that if a student is struggling with executive functions, it doesn't mean that they fall under one of those categories, because all students will struggle with some sort of executive functioning skill at some point in their life. So the important thing here is that these skills can be taught, and there are so many accommodations that we can do to support skills like this in the classroom. Okay, so this is a quote from Adele Diamond. She's a developmental cognitive neuroscientist at UBC. So if you look at what predicts how well children will do later in school, more and more evidence is showing that executive functions, working memory, and inhibition actually predict success better than IQ tests. So we're going to talk about this Marshmallow Test. And what they did was, I'll show you a video, but what they did was that if they had children come in and you would say, you can have one marshmallow now, or you can have two if you wait until I come back. And what the study actually did end up showing is that the children that were able to demonstrate self-control and like delay their gratification tended to have better outcomes later in life, such as success in school and physical health. So I will show the video and hope that it works.
The Marshmallow Test is a really great way to show how children delay gratification. We tried it out with the 4 children we've been following since September 2010, Alfie, Millie, Mackay, and Pratmesh. Here's how it works. We had each child on their own sit at the table at a desk with a plate and 1 marshmallow. They could either choose to eat the marshmallow, the 1 marshmallow right then and there, or they could wait until I came back into the room and have 2 marshmallows. I left them alone in the room for 15 minutes. Take a look. The Marshmallow Test has been used for decades by psychologists. It's been used with children to predict later academic success, including literacy, SAT scores, and other academic outcomes. There's no definitive answers from the Marshmallow Test. It's not a matter of passing or failing. What we're looking for is whether children can really resist this piece of white candy sitting in front of them that's sweet, that, the smell of it, the allure of the marshmallow. In Pratmesh's case, we really saw this added curiosity because he had never actually tasted a marshmallow before. All of the children managed to show some level of self-control and resist the temptation to eat the whole marshmallow. As you can see from the footage, you can catch a glimpse into children's ability to control their impulses. This ability, which is developed around the time of kindergarten, can be linked to other outcomes later in life. At the end, the marshmallows were in kind of different states. Some had been squished, ripped apart, nibbled around. There was this temptation and there was this impulse to kind of try it out.
So when executive functions in the classroom. So when students do well with EF skills, they're able to make plans, keep track of time, keep track of more than one thing at once. They can meaningfully include past knowledge in discussions and assignments. They use those that their memory, engage in small group or classroom. They can reflect on their work, change their minds and make corrections while thinking, reading, and writing. Finish work on time, ask for help, wait to speak until called on, and seek more information when needed. What you might see from a student that struggles with executive function, they may have difficulty planning a project or prioritizing their tasks, comprehending how much time a project will actually take to complete. So you might see students procrastinate, telling a story verbally or in writing, communicating details in an organized sequential manner. So they might just have difficulty lining those details of the story up, remembering what they just read or heard. So sometimes comprehension might be something that they struggle with. Following directions or a sequence of steps. If you give them 3 steps, they might remember the first one, but not the 2 or 3. When rules are, they might have difficulty when you change the rules or the routines. They might have difficulty switching from one task to another. So if you switch from English to math, they might need some extra support within that transition. They might have difficulty regulating their emotions, keeping track of their belongings, initiating activities or tasks, or generating ideas independently, retaining information while doing something with it. So remembering a phone number when dialing, and waiting for turn, and then finishing assignments. Okay, so this is just an example, something that you might see every day. So when the bell rings, a student needs to get ready for recess, meaning they have to prioritize. They have to remember where they put their jacket, so they have to use their memory. They're also trying to arrange a game of soccer, so they're using their organizational skills. They also have to hold all this information in their mind to use it efficiently, working memory, and keep themselves regulated if their friends don't want to play soccer. So it'd be their cognitive flexibility or their impulse control. Make sure that they don't get really upset when their friends say, I don't want to play. They are trying to hold on to many balloons at once. The boss of the brain is executing all these processes at the same time. If the student struggles with executive functioning, they may let go of a balloon or two. So this link right here is actually just an example like this, where it goes through a day in the life of a student that struggles with executive functioning. And I do urge you to check it out because it kind of just opens your mind to those difficulties that some of our students are facing every day. So we're going to move into our 3-concept model of executive functions, and that includes our cognitive flexibility, impulse control, and our working memory. So again, that's only one way to conceptualize executive functioning. So cognitive flexibility, it involves our ability to adjust behavior to unexpected changes. So to be okay when things change, move freely from one situation to another. So say you're moving from play to homework or play to school, and then think about things in a different way. So that'd be coming up with different answers, knowing that there's more than one solution to every problem, that kind of thing. So students with poor flexible thinking skills can often seem rigid, that they're uncomfortable with change. They might feel fearful. They might be easily frustrated by challenges that come their way. So those are students that shut down right away. They tend to get stuck in one activity or in one way of perceiving things. They don't want to change their thoughts. And they also have a hard time coming with alternative solutions. So you see the cat here, you can tell it's a blue cat. A student that struggles with cognitive flexibility, they might think that this other blue cat's the only one that would make sense, that that's the only one that would match. However, you can see that this would match. The blue lollipop might match because it's blue. The yellow cat might match because it's the cat. There are other ways of finding those solutions. So for example, when it's time to stop playing a game and get ready for school, a student who struggles with flexibility may find this intolerable to switch from play mode to school mode. They may have a tantrum. Flexible thinking would help them realize they could pick up the game where they left off when they get home from school. So these are some strategies. So you can do activities that involve multiple meaning words, word categories, and number puzzles. Visualizing and discussing jokes, riddles, puns, multiple meaning words, just to increase their flexibility of different meanings. Model using self-talk while approaching a single task or situation in different ways. So this would be yourself as the teacher or the guardian or whoever, the adult, that uses the walkthrough strategy. So when you approach a problem, you talk out loud about the different solutions you could take. Normalize making mistakes and how we learn from them. So own up to those mistakes and how you learned from them. Use language to show flexibility. So again, in those, when you make mistakes, or when I don't understand a problem, I'm stuck right now. What's my plan B? It's not a big deal. Present expectations and routines explicitly and use visuals. So this just decreases their need to be flexible if they know what's coming and they have routines. And then be consistent and predictable with additional, and then use those additional supports during transitions. So working memory is our next executive function we'll talk about. So this is the capacity to hold information in mind for the purpose of completing a task. There are two types of working memory. So there's auditory memory and visual spatial memory. And then they play an important role in concentration and following directions. So students with working memory difficulties, they might abandon activities before completing them, appear to be daydreaming often. They may raise their hands to answer questions but forget what they wanted to say, mix up material inappropriately, and then they might forget how to continue an activity that they started even though the teacher has explained the steps. So those are those kids that are going to start the activity because teacher told them to start. However, they're going to get that first step done. They're going to forget 2, 3, 4, 5 and need some extra support. So for example, in math class, a student might remember the numbers the teacher said to add. So if the teacher says, I'd like you to add 21 and 13, they might remember the 21 and 13, but then they might not recall what they're actually supposed to do with them. Or following instructions may also be difficult. The teacher may ask a student to put snow boots away, but first hang up their coat. They may only do one task or forget which one she's supposed to do first. So these are some strategies for working memory to build those skills. If the student has strong visual spatial skills, try taking information from a word problem and inserting it into a visual diagram. So those are those multi-sensory type of strategies. So you want to use blocks to complete a math problem. You might just want to lay things out a little differently for those students. You can play memory games like memory card games, or if you remember the game Bop It, where you they give you instructions to do it and then you'd have to follow them. And then teach external storage systems like an agenda, checklist, to-do list, apps, that sort of thing. And what that does, it just kind of decreases that load. It decreases what they have to remember by having it in front of them. So repetition of information, use templates for repetitive procedures, teach recall strategies like mnemonics. I know I did that a lot. And then break up and chunk information. So what that does is just takes up fewer spots or fewer slots in their memory, and then focus on one thing at a time and then shift between activities. So multitasking is extremely difficult for students that struggle with working memory. Just kind of relieve that if you can. So the idea here is that you just want to offload, and what that means is that first idea that their brain doesn't have to work as hard when you can find a way to offload some tasks we're asking them to do. So by writing down their homework assignments or making a checklist of what they need to do, that just kind of relieves that working memory stress. So impulse control is the skills to stop one's own behavior at appropriate time, including stopping actions and thoughts. Impulsivity involves doing or saying whatever comes to mind without reflection, and it's closely linked to self and emotional control. So students who struggle with impulse control may show these types of behaviors, such as speaking out, interrupting classmates, quitting games, shoving in line, cutting in front of others, jumping up from their seat, asking questions about irrelevant topics, and having personal boundary issues. Basically, they just haven't learned to ask what's happening here. When this happened to me before, what did I do? If I say this or I do that, will it help the situation or will it make it worse? So for example, when a teacher asks the class what their favorite holiday is, a student who struggles with impulse control may put up their hand at first, but before they're even called on, they may blurt out their answer, they may interrupt another student, or talk off topic. So example, they might say, I went to the park this weekend, instead of saying what their favorite holiday was. So some strategies for impulse control. So you want to identify early signs of loss of control and plan for extra support during these moments. So you might notice that a student starts fidgeting, or they start talking very loudly, or just little signs that they might just lose control soon. You might want to implement a nonsense word to cue self-control, just to get that student's attention without kind of discreetly, so that they can use their calming tools. You can teach alternatives to undesirable behavior. So instead of having a student interrupt you or blurt out their answers, you might get them to have the option of, you can use a sticky note to write something down rather than interrupting. You might want to offer cues and prompts to strengthen the stop function. So an idea for this would be a wristband, a reminder to, I need to raise my hand before I talk. You can teach the stop, think, go strategy. Teach the use of tools and techniques to improve monitoring of tasks and behavior. Teach calming techniques such as deep belly breathing and mindfulness. You want to allow for movement breaks and time for creative activities. And what that does, it activates a different part of the brain to get that student to calm down and maybe pay attention. It gives their brain a little break. So our key takeaways today: 1, executive functioning is a set of processes needed to manage oneself and one's resources to achieve a goal. They are extremely important for learning and behavior. The prefrontal cortex is in charge of our executive functions, and it is not fully developed until mid-20s, meaning executive functions are developed, not automatic. All students will struggle with one or more executive functions at one time or another. Everyone has unique strengths and weaknesses. Three main concepts of executive functions are cognitive flexibility, working memory, and impulse control. And there are numerous ways to teach and accommodate for EF for students. So these are some additional resources. So Developing Child at Harvard, they have really good resources on executive functions. And then Executive Functions 101 is just, it's on understood.org. And it's a booklet that explains all the different executive functions and different strategies. And these are just the references. And that's all I have for you. And thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks.